Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's event with Edwin Hill and Hank Phillippi Ryan for Edwin's new novel, Watch Her. My name is Adam, and I'm an events host and bookseller at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. Whether you know our store well or have never heard of our name before, we are thrilled to welcome you into our community tonight. I'd like to first thank all of you for choosing to support Edwin and an independent bookstore with your presence. Thank you so much. Before we get started, just a couple of nuts and bolts. The chat and the Q&A box found at the bottom of your Zoom window are both open, so feel free to make use of those. I'll be dropping some links to Edwin and Hank's books in there, so keep an eye on that. And there will also be an audience Q&A, and we know you've got some good questions, so feel free to use the Q&A box. Please note that Brookline Booksmith has a strict policy against abusive behavior and language, and at our discretion, any attendee can be removed from an event for partaking in such behavior. So discretion advised, please. I am absolutely thrilled to have a very special longtime friend of the Booksmith here to moderate tonight's event, and that is the incomparable Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank is the USA Today bestselling author of 12 thrillers, winning 5 Agathas and the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and 37 Emmys for TV investigative reporting. She has also a new standalone thriller called The First to Lie, which is on our shelves now. Thank you so much, Hank, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Edwin. That's so nice of you.
And the reason we're all here tonight, another good friend of the Booksmith and one of my personal favorite guests that we've had over the years, Edwin Hill. Edwin is the author of the critically acclaimed Hester Thursby mystery series, which I know is not a surprise to any of you, but it is worth repeating. The first in the series, Little Comfort, was an Agatha Award finalist, a selection of the Mysterious Press First Mystery Club, and a Publishers Marketplace Buzz book selection. The second installment, The Missing Ones, was also an Agatha Award finalist and a Sue Grafton Memorial Award nominee. Formerly the vice president and editorial director for Bedford St. Martin's, he now teaches at Emerson College and has written for the LA Review of Books and Publishers Weekly, to name just a few. Edwin is here to speak with us tonight about the third installment in his award-winning series, which continues Harvard librarian Hester Thursby's story as she becomes enmeshed with a powerful Boston family desperate to keep their deepest secrets from coming to light. So thank you so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen, Hank Phillippi Ryan and Edwin Hill.
Thank you, Alex. It's so great to see you all. And Edwin, I see you sneaking a look at the chat. Do you see how many people are here? Joanna Schaffhausen and Elaine and Hillary and Dabney and James Ziskin is here. That's so nice. And Edith Maxwell, that's so wonderful. And Glennie and Jason Allison and Catherine Holland. It's just S.C. Perkins. How does it feel to you to see, look at the numbers, you're like almost to 100 people now who are here cheering you on.
It's amazing. These events at Brookline Booksmith, this is my third time here, have been amazing every single time. This year it feels especially amazing because we've spent so much time by ourselves, and to be able to, I am actually going to close the chat because it's a little distracting. I almost left the meeting just there. It is amazing to see so many familiar faces, to see some names that I don't recognize, and I sincerely mean this when I say thank you all for taking an hour out of your day to come and listen to me chat. It means a lot to me.
I mean, it's kind of great because I'm addicted to the chat here because I see Sandy Dethlefsen here and Leah Strauss and Andrew Fisher, and I just can't possibly, August Norman is here and Emily Ross and S.C. Perkins and Kate Rakulia. I mean, these are people who are fans and readers and fellow authors, and they have just shown up here to cheer you on. So that's, it's one of the things that we were talking earlier about how we're sort of hearing now in this horrible, ridiculous, insane time, people are talking a little bit about the things that we cherish and will remember about it, which means we're imagining a time when it's not here. And one of the things is this sort of community, which is represented here for you.
Yeah. When I had my first book came out just 2.5 years ago. I discovered that there was this amazing writing community. There's an amazing writing community in a lot of different ways in Boston. There's an amazing overarching writing community. You see that through Grub Street. I see a bunch of people from class that I'm taking right now. You see it through the crime writing community. And then there's an amazing community throughout the entire country of crime writers. And I see a lot of those people here too. And it's incredible to see people come out and be supportive of each other and to just cheer people on.
And the cool part too is that and one of the things I loved that you just said was that you're seeing people's names you don't know. And that's the other really great part, is that readers, people from all over the country, that your fans and your readers who you might never know because you might not be going where they are, can all come see you and hear you now.
Oh,
so
yeah. It's been one of the interesting things about, I think when this all started in March, April, we didn't really know what was going to happen. And then a bunch of people started figuring out how to work within this new world that we live in. And one of the benefits is that you can have an event with a lot of reach. I mean, here I am in my own home office and I'm able to talk to all of these people. I didn't have to get in my car and drive through the snow or anything like that. And there is something to be said for that.
Definitely. And I promised myself I wouldn't read any more names, but you need to know that Aline Cogdill is here from the Sun Sentinel.
Aline is a huge supporter. There are lots and lots of people who have supported me as I've sort of ventured out on this. Aline is a writer. She writes for the AP. She also writes for the Sun Sentinel. She reviewed my second book and my third book, and I just so appreciate that.
And she has put the link to her review of your book. So go read that, not right now, but when we're done. And also Brookline Booksmith has put up a link to buy your book. So no pressure, it's just Edwin's career. So you're gonna do that. So I
borrow that line from you sometimes, Hank, when we're not together.
Well, true is true. True.
Yes.
True. So let's talk about Watch Her a little bit. I'm going to ask you some specific things, no spoilery things, but just for the basics, tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, this is the third book in the series. It picks up about a year and a half after the end of my second book, which is called The Missing Ones. And it starts when Hester, who's the main character, Hester Thursby, is a librarian, and her longtime boyfriend, Morgan, go to an art event, an art opening at a fictional for-profit college that's based in Jamaica Plain. Hester has a side career of finding missing people. And while she's at the event, she and her friend, who's a detective with the Boston police, her name's Angela White, they get called away to a house in Jamaica Plain to investigate a break-in. Angela, who's a seasoned detective, suspects that maybe there wasn't actually a break-in, and that's the impetus to the entire story. As they start digging into the story, they discover that the family that owns the house and owns the school, have a long-held secret that they're keeping from each other. And Angela actually learns that she is a little bit entwined in that secret as well.
I mean, it's so much fun to read your book because, first of all, I should say that Watch Her, although it is the third in the series, and of course you should read every single one of them, can be read on its own as your first and then go back and read the first two. But Little Comfort and The Missing One. But talk about reviews. Let me read you one for your Kirkus review. Says, complex characterization and a masterful mystery make this a superior read. And it's that combination of those two critical elements that make you so good at this. How do you, did you start with a character? Do you start with an idea? Do you start with a twist? What is the germ of this book?
This book, all three of my books have been completely different how I've approached them. With this one, I started with the idea of the for-profit college, the family that owns the for-profit college. I was kind of inspired by the Corinthian. There was a nationwide college, for-profit college called Corinthian College that went under about 5 years ago. There were students all over the country. There were campuses all over the country. In the space of maybe a month or a month and a half, the school closed and all of those students were left without degrees, without without a way forward. And I was just kind of interested in that. The school that I wound up basing, that I wound up creating for this, it doesn't go under, it's not corrupt the way Corinthian colleges maybe was. I don't want to say anything that they were, but that was sort of my entry point into the story. With this one, I had no idea how the story was going to end. I knew that there was this family. I knew that they had this secret, but I changed sort of the who did it. I changed the who did it of the story. I mean, there are probably 8 or 9 main characters in this story, and each one of them was the murderer, except for Hester. Hester couldn't be the murderer.
So you, as you were writing, you can see, I mean, that is part of the complexity of the story, that as the story starts taking off, you as an author and us as readers could say, ooh, I wonder if it's that person. Ooh, I wonder if it's that person. So you're saying you didn't really know either.
I didn't know, and I did change it, and that is part of the fun, because you want to sort of lead people in the wrong direction for a little while. So if you, as the author, are going in the wrong direction too, that can help with the story as you're developing it.
And a for-profit school is such a cool idea, because we feel like we know how that would work, but we don't necessarily know how that would work. And there's a lot of money involved, and there are lots of lives involved, and there are lots of identities involved, and there are lots of possibilities for manipulation. Did you know about for-profit schools before you read about the Corinthian story? And did you delve into that to find out, all the secret ways that things could happen?
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, a for-profit school is something like University of Phoenix. And there are many good for-profit schools. And the only difference really between a traditional college and a for-profit college is that a for-profit college has a board of directors, and they expect a profit to be delivered to them. So they offer programs, they offer education, they offer degrees that are legitimate degrees. But it is a different relationship when you have that need to deliver that profit. So I wanted to explore that. I worked in college publishing. I see many people in the chat who I used to work with in college publishing. And of course, we sold books to for-profit schools all the time. And in a couple of my roles, I worked very closely with the sales reps who worked with the for-profit schools. So I was just kind of fascinated by the model. They've been under a lot of pressure. The for-profit industry has been under a lot of pressure for the last 10 years. So I thought it was really interesting to look at a business in decline as well, and see what kind of pressures that puts people under. And so this school is a very tightly run school. It's in my fictional school. It's owned by a family. It's privately held. And I wanted to look at what the pressures of maybe declining revenue or a declining your profitability might do to that family and the people involved with that business.
I mean, one of the threads that runs through the story is their sort of PR campaign to get more students to come to the school, because the more students they have, the more money they get. One of your other reviews, I think, was it Publishers Weekly, Such a Rave, said readers will agree that a school makes a grade A mystery. But that is the other element of it, is the mystery element of it. So you get this cool structure of almost a setting, and there's more to come on setting in a minute, but you get this sort of cool structure of setting, but then you have to braid a logical mystery into it. How do you think about mysteries? Have you always loved them? Have you always read them? Do you remember one that you read that was pivotal? I don't mean to ask you about a book, because that's the hardest question in the world. Any that have influenced you. What is it that you love about mysteries?
I like the puzzle aspect of the mysteries, and I use this analogy in the actual book of doing a puzzle without looking at the box top, the picture, and that's what I sort of think of as when you're writing a mystery. You kind of have all of these pieces all over the place, and you start putting them together, and eventually you sort of start seeing how they're coming together. For the Hester Thursby series, I tell them in 4 points of view. So Hester's one point of view, and then there are always 3 other points of view. And one of the things that I like in that puzzle building aspect of it is figuring out which of the characters knows which parts of the mystery, and then figuring out when that part of the mystery is going to be revealed to the reader. And you want to be fair with your reader so that characters aren't holding information back for too long. And then I always say with the Hester Thursby mysteries, the fifth point of view character is the reader, because the reader, at ultimately the end of the story, even Hester doesn't know all of the pieces, but you, the reader, do. And if I've done my job well, you are able to put all of those pieces together and see this entire picture. So at the end of I'm not going to give anything away, but at the end of this story, Hester doesn't know a key piece of information, but another character does. And it's important that, it's actually both important that Hester doesn't know it, and it's important that the other character does know it. But
that's like when you do a puzzle with a friend who's not really a friend, and they hold out a piece so they can be the one that finishes the puzzle. That's the thing. That's the part that you don't want someone to do.
It fell on the floor.
When you have the dramatic irony of the multiple points of view, then it's fair that you do that. And I do remember in the book when someone says, I love doing puzzles upside down so you can't see the picture. Doesn't Hester say something like, get a life? Or,
she can't stand it. And that's based on a real life person who may be on the call right now. But I have a dear friend who likes to do puzzles without looking at the box. And it does make it harder. That's what I'll have to say.
Yes. Well, that's exactly completely analogous to reading a mystery, because you take the little piece. We as readers, your fifth point of view, we as readers take the pieces that we think are in the puzzle and start building the puzzle in our head. And that's what the author's job is. That's what our job as authors is, to offer pieces that maybe don't fit, and that later have to be taken out to reassemble the picture that's really there. And that is fun. And that really is fun. And you brought up Hester, and we really need to talk about her. I read something else about Hester Thursby that says she's tough, cerebral, relatable, and flawed. What do you think about that characterization, and where did she come from in your brain? I mean, she's already a classic character. I'm not quite sure how you did that.
Hester coming up with Hester was like such a long journey. My first, but like a lot of writers, my first book was a very long journey, filled with self-doubt and everything that comes with writing a first book.
And so like the self-doubt is still there.
Right? Oh yeah, the self-doubt is still there. It's a different self-doubt. When you're writing your first book, you're sort of working on your own. You have to have a lot of self-discipline. You have to have a lot of self-belief. But when I started Little Comfort, it was actually, for anyone who's read it, the first book was about Sam Blaine and Gabe DePercio, who were the antagonists. I was going to write a book about, about anti-heroes. And I sort of wrote for a while, and it just wasn't working, so I decided I needed to add a protagonist, and that's when I added Hester. And it always makes me laugh. People say, why do you write from a woman's point of view? And I hate to tell you, this was my entire decision-making process. I was like, I've written part of this book from these two guys' points of view, and I don't want to write something about three men, so I'm going to make her a woman. And so there's Hester Thursby. Now here I am 3 books later. But how did I develop her as a character? I mean, a lot of some of the pieces of her personality obviously come from me. I mean, I think all characters come from the author in some way or another. So like, she really likes horror movies, and she likes to watch bad television, which I like to do as well. She can be a little prickly, and she likes to be alone, and those are characteristics about myself as well. But then you have to branch out, and you have to find other things to fill in her life. I mean, there are lots of things about Hester that are different than me. She's a woman, obviously. She's 12 years younger than I am. She works as a librarian. I've never worked as a librarian. She's responsible for this child, which sort of fuels a lot of her character development. I don't have any kids, so lots of things that I've had to sort of figure out about her character as I've moved forward. Once I figured her out, I did sort of start developing a little character arc for her for the entire series. And that's one of the things that I'm really happy about with this book. I feel like Hester went to the place that I wanted her to go in this novel from from the very beginning when I first conceptualized
She does
her.
seem different. I was going to sort of bring that up to you, and I didn't know whether that was maybe me reading it. She seems softer a little bit, vulnerable, loving a little bit. I mean, she even plays that game with her not husband about, again, the puzzle motif of giving little pieces of each other, but not knowing the big picture of each other, which I thought was great. I have to tell you that Shani is saying Hester doesn't like mayo, just like Edwin.
That is true.
That's great. That's great. But one of the brilliant parts about Hester, though, is that she's a research librarian. That was a good idea.
Yeah.
Talk about how that evolved.
Sure. You know, when you come up with a character, you do, this is not original, but you do these things called what if exercises. You start asking yourself, what if she was a baker? What if she was a veterinarian? So when I came up with her, I mean, I knew a couple things about Hester. I knew that she was a woman, and I knew that she was 36 years old. That was about what I knew about her. And then I added in Kate. So I knew she had a child, and then I added in Morgan. And then now I know sort of what her home life looks like. So then I had to come up with a career. When I first added her to the book was supposed to be, this is my first book. It was supposed to be funny, and it wound up not being a funny book at all. And so for a while she was going to be a baker. It was going to be like a lighter mystery. She was going to be a baker, and she really, in that earlier draft, she really liked romantic comedies. So the novel was going to be called His Girl Thursby after His Girl Friday. But then the book took a very dark turn, and none of that worked anymore. So I had to pull it all out. And so I started going through different careers that she could do. She was going to be a psychiatrist for a little while. But then I was walking through Harvard Yard one day. I used to live right near Harvard Yard. And there was Widener Library right in front of me. And I thought, you know what? You know who knows how to ask a question? A librarian. You know who knows how to work with information? A librarian. You know who knows how to find information that not everyone else knows how to find? A librarian. I thought, well, that's the career that she's going to have.
And a librarian, a research librarian, also likes to look for those things. It's not just that they can or that they have an aptitude for it, but they're curious and they love information and they love digging up things. And so that's one of the things in mysteries too, is that the main character has to have a logical role to play. And the idea of you bringing a police officer in as really the detective and Hester as the helper really works well and makes sense. Because often in amateur sleuth mysteries, you think, well, why don't you just call the police? So the police call Hester, and that makes a lot of sense.
Well, Angela White was another happy accident. It's funny that, I think happy accidents, like you discard the accidents that aren't happy and you keep the ones that work. So when I was writing my first book, Angela, there was a murder. I needed to have a detective. And so for a little while, Angela White came on the scene. And for a while, she didn't even have a name. Oh. And then, I just started adding little scenes with her in them and sort of building her character out. And then when that first book came out and I was going around to meet with library events and stuff like that, a lot of readers were like, we like that Angela White. Even she's only in like a couple scenes in the first book. I thought, okay. So I added her into the second book. I gave her a small storyline in that book. And again, I heard from readers that are like, we like this Angela White. So when I started this third book, I was like, let's give Angela White a really big, hefty role. And so she wound up being one of the POV characters. And she's one of the characters that I'm really pleased with in this novel.
Well, she comes through as a real person. And is that your homage to Policewoman? Is that what the show was on TV with Anne that you talk about? Is that one of your bad TV favorites?
Well, I don't think I've ever even, actually I had to do a little research. I had to watch a couple of episodes of Policewoman for this book, but I had never seen it before. It's a 70s cop show, if you like those.
Oh, it's fun. It's fun. And the thing is that, isn't it interesting to you as an author, when you see a character like Angela push her way to the front of your mind, And clearly the same thing happened to readers who even picked up on her. I mean, people who already loved Hester picked up on her even in her small roles.
Yeah. Oh no, I think it's that's one of the most, that's one of the fun things that happens. When you're when you're writing a first draft of a novel, it can really feel challenging.
Yes.
And you know, every day you sort of sit down and you try and you struggle to get words on the page. And one of the really fun things that happens during that first draft period is you find the things that you want to latch onto. It goes along with the puzzles, but this is the character piece of it. You're like, oh, that is resonating for me, and that's resonating for me, and the rest of this we can throw out. And that's the way you sort of figure out when you go into your second draft, like how you're going to expand this and make it into a better thing. I mean, I'll tell you, the book I'm working on right now has, I pitched it to my editor. I said it was about a psychologist who meets with a lot of wealthy women, and he finds connections between the wealthy women. And he always says, I feel like I go to the world's largest cocktail party because I know all these things about these people that they don't know about each other. That sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Well, guess what? I just cut the psychologist from the book because like some other character came in and took over the book for me.
But it was the idea, your brain just hadn't evolved a way to make that idea work. So you took the first way, and you learned from the first way not working what would work. So that first idea did work because it got into the second idea.
Yeah.
And you were talking about writing so difficult, you know, that it was so difficult. And that's exactly what is so impressive. One of the many things about your writing is that you use those coincidences and those defeats as victories and stair steps. When you're writing, then do you say to yourself, I sometimes say to myself, this is terrible, well, I'll just cut it later, let me just see where this goes. And that's a learned skill.
Oh, I do that all the time. In fact, I mean, I'll write things now. I'll write things just knowing that they're not going to be in the final book. But some days, I mean, when I try to write, when I'm writing a first draft, I try to write a certain amount of words every day. Mm-hmm. And some days you just have to keep the terrible things in there because you'll never get to your quota for the day.
Exactly. I know when I'm trying to make my word count, my manuscript will say things like, well, you know what I think about? Here's kind of what I think about that. I'm wondering whether it might be more like the other thing that I was thinking about the other day. And I'm like, you're just doing your words. That'll be fine. That'll all go. But then you have the days, you know, your Angela days or your puzzle days when, you know, or the moment that Hester reveals something about herself that you didn't know. And you think, wow, you know, where did that come from? Talk about that a little bit, that little bit of magic.
Oh, sure. This book, it's interesting. I find when you're writing a draft, when you're writing through a novel, there is this moment where I get to where all of a sudden I go from I don't even know how to. It's like all the pieces suddenly fit together. And I stopped focusing on word count. A lot of writing a draft is word count. I hate to say it, but I stopped focusing on word count. And what happens then, and this is so stupid, but you wind up hovering around the same word count because you're making things better by taking things out and putting things back in. And you just find these, you find these things, you find, what would be something that I would have found in this one? There's a character in this book called Barrett. And this is Barrett is a character who was not in the first draft. And he sort of evolved in the second draft. And once I sort of there are about 3 other characters who I sort of combined into that character. And once I figured out that I could get rid of those characters that weren't working, and who this character was and sort of what was driving him and why he's a student at the school in the book, like why he was at the school, sort of what brought him to the school and what secret he brought to the table. All of a sudden I was really excited to get up. I mean, I would get up at like 3 a.m. to work on this because I was so excited to kind of figure out where it was going from there. And those are the moments as a writer that you cherish.
And you know, it's interesting because that slog up the mountain to the point of getting there. There's no way to make that take any less time. I always think of it as, my husband will say, "How you doing?" And I'm like, the ocean liner is still on the way out. The ocean liner is still, and he says, "What?" And I say, "I got to get it to the point that the ocean liner is turning for home."
Yeah.
And when that big ship with all of the characters on it starts to turn, and they're all sort of going in the same direction to the same place with the same almost inevitable ending, that's the moment when you think, like, this is going to be a story. They're all going to the same place. That's so, but you can't get there without that journey. I hate the word
you have
journey,
to go through to get there, and it just takes a little while. And it's for each book, it's totally different. I mean, I wrote at the very beginning of the pandemic, I wrote a draft of a novel very quickly for something that is not under contract, that just like flowed out of my fingers. I don't know how it happened. I based it on a one-page outline, and after 2 months, I had 100,000 words, and they felt pretty good. And with this book that I'm working on now, the one that is going to follow up the one that we're talking about today, it's not flowing quite like that. And so I'm looking for that to happen eventually.
Because somebody said to me once that when you get a good idea, it's like dropping one drop of iodine into a glass of clear water, and everything else the water changes totally. And when you get that idea, your book changes totally. So going back to kind of Barrett a little bit, because I was going to ask about that. Someone in your book says art should say something true. And I'm wondering, a good novel, a good mystery, a good thriller is about more than the mystery and the characters. So you touch on social issues and human issues in this book, a way of sort of opening a door to thinking about things.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I guess all of my books have addressed sexuality and sexual identity in different ways. I'll talk a little bit about Angela, who is a character. Again, she's been in all 3 books, but I really wanted to make sure that she was a fully developed character in this novel, and by being fully developed, that we explored her whole life. So we go into her home. She's married to a woman named Carrie. We had met Carrie in earlier novels, but not fully. And we had heard about the child that they're raising, but not fully. So I wanted to make sure that we were looking at her life from all different directions, and showing what it means to be Angela White in this world where she's married to this woman and they live in Dorchester. And there's a messiness to that life which should be there, and there's a joy to that life that should be there as well. And this is all characterization, of course, but I tried to push it further with Angela and with Barrett in ways that I hope will resonate with readers. Why
is that important?
I feel like it's important to represent the world that we live in. I have my experience that I can bring to the table, but fiction writer's job is to represent many lives and make those lives as authentic as possible. And so I was looking to bring that authenticity to the page for those characters, for Hester and Morgan and all the other characters.
And it really, it really comes through. It really comes through. Ted is saying another reason why I love to read Ed's books, and he says, "Bravo, Edwin, we need to represent many lives authentically." I so agree.
Thank you.
So going on a little bit, the book is so gorgeously not about people, but about this setting of Jamaica Plain in Boston. And there's a mansion called Pine Bank that is such a major player in this book. Talk a little bit about Pine Bank.
Oh, sure. That was one of my favorite things that I came up with for this book. And it was a happy accident as well. So in Jamaica Plain, there, for anyone who's not from here, there's a big park in Boston called the Emerald Necklace. It was designed by Frederick Olmsted at the turn of the 20th century. And at the center of that park, there's a pond called Jamaica Pond. And when the park department acquired all of the land, that park used to be, it used to be a summer resort where people from Beacon Hill would come out and stay at their summer houses on the pond. And when they acquired the land, they tore down all of the houses except for one. Olmsted decided that he liked Pine Bank Mansion and he wanted to incorporate it into the design of the overall park. So the house was there for many decades. It was a beautiful house, and the park system used it. The Children's Museum was there for a while. They used it for offices. But then there were a few fires there in the 70s, and they just, the house was mostly destroyed. So when I first moved back to Boston, I'd lived in California for a while. I came back to Boston. I lived near the pond in Jamaica Plain. I used to go running past the house, or the ruins of the house. There was this ruin there. It was surrounded by a chain link fence. It was covered with graffiti. And I used to always imagine, what would it be like to live on Jamaica Pond? I think that would be awesome. And so when I was coming up with where I wanted the setting for this book to be, I've tried to move the books around different parts of New England. For this book, I really wanted to keep it in Boston. And I decided on Jamaica Plain because I liked using the park. I like that it's both urban and residential. And for a while, the family that owns the school, there are a bunch of big houses near Jamaica Pond. I just had them live in one of those big houses. And then I was going over to just do some research to get a feel for the neighborhood, and I was walking around the pond. And by now, the ruin has been torn down. It's no longer there. And I walked by the plaque for it, and I hadn't remembered that the ruin was even there. And I thought, oh God, I forgot about that and how exciting that house was. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I'm a fiction writer. Why don't I just bring this back and have the family live there? So I finagled it a little bit. I think I made it plausible that the house would still be there and that it would actually be a privately owned residence.
What could be another Pine Bank? I mean, did you do a lot of research about it? What did it look like, and who owned it? Do you know this stuff?
I do. I can't remember who the last owner of it was. It was owned by a series of different families. There were actually 3 different Pine Bank mansions. The first one burned down. The second one was torn down and replaced with the final one. It was a big Georgian mansion. It was made out of sandstone. It was surrounded by cottonwood trees. And it was very, very beautiful. I went to I did a lot of the research through the Jamaica Plain Historical Society, which you can find online if anyone wants to. There are pictures there of the house and stuff like that.
Oh, that's very cool. Yes, everybody's going to go look at it, because what better place for representation of wealth and separateness, and a place where no one can go unless they're invited, a building that might have secret places in it, and a history. And there is a lot of, part of this book is about history and what happened in the past, and peeling away the layers of the present to get to the past. Did you know how that was going to go? Is there always a layering of time?
Yeah, that was actually one of the parts of the book that I knew from the very start. This book starts with a prologue. I know it starts with a prologue. I know not everyone likes that. It starts with a prologue set in 1997. It's told from a character named Maxine Polakowski's point of view. And then after that prologue, it flashes forward to the present. And I always knew what was going to happen in that scene, and I always knew sort of what the driving storyline was going to be in that scene. One happy accident that happened was I said it at the very end of August in 1997, and so after I'd written the first or second draft, I thought I should look and see what happened then. And so, were there any current events or anything like that? So I looked online. And lo and behold, that was the day that Princess Diana was in her car crash. And I thought, well, that's not something, if it's actually said on that day, that's not anything that you can actually ignore. And so I started working it into the storyline. And then it actually became part of the storyline and an interesting, for me, an interesting part of the storyline. So it's always, it's fun when those little things sort of pop up.
And they always do. I mean, I always look up to see what happened around that time that people would be thinking about or referring to, or that might be affecting their consciousness. And so often they turn into thematic threads in the novel. It's just one of those things. I guess maybe it means you got it right. You know, that's what sort of, you know what I mean? That's sort of, it's sort of real. There are lots of secrets in the book. Everybody has a secret. It's so critical in a novel like this to have everybody have a secret. Did you learn them as you went on?
Some of them I knew from the start, and some of them evolved when I start the novels. I don't know who the point of view characters are.
Oh.
I know Esther is going to be the point of view character, obviously, but as I work through my first draft, I kind of latch on to whose voice is strongest. And so when I started this book, I knew that Maxine would have a point of view character, and I knew that Hester would. I didn't know about Angela or Barrett. Those are the 4 point of view characters.
But so when you get to, so you're writing along in this book,
yeah,
and your sort of writer brain feels it's time for another voice to come in. And does it sort of present to you who that voice will be? I mean, it makes, when we read the book, when all of the people who are now talking about, C. Dorsey says, I feel like it's important to represent the world that we live in. She says, or he, why I read Edwin Hill in a nutshell. So we'll save these comments for you, because you will love to read these. And Ronald Epp says, the Perkins family of Beacon Hill owned Pine Bank.
Oh, that's right. And you know who's on this call? Stephanie Perkins of the Perkins family.
That's so interesting. And so I love this. And there are links now in the chat to buy Edwin's book. So please do that. So anyway, we were talking about the points of view.
So as far as secrets go, like I knew Hester's secrets and I knew Maxine's secrets, but I didn't know Barrett because I had no idea who Barrett was. So once Barrett sort of evolved out of the story, then I started to assign what his secrets were. Angela came into the story relatively quickly because again, I'd been talking to readers and they'd been telling me that they liked her. I had to figure out how she was going to be worked into the story, and how you obviously you want everything to feel natural, and I wanted the crime for Hester and Angela to have a reason to be investigating this crime together.
One of the things that I love about this book, and it's sneaky. Catherine is saying, aha, Perkins as in Perkins Street, JP. She says, I love all these threads and backstory. So that's nice. And S.C. Perkins is saying they might just be my relatives.
I think they are, yes.
That's so great. All right, that's wonderful. That's what you meant by that. That's great. One of the things that I think you might have had some fun with in this book is the dogs.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Talk a little bit about how so many dogs.
So this, everyone knows I love dogs, but I may have gone too far in this one. There are 6 named dogs and 1 iguana in this book. Actually, I have to say I love the dogs in this novel. One of the dogs is a lot of the dogs are holdovers in the series, but one dog that in my last book, in the missing ones, there was a dog named George who came up at the very end of the novel. And if there's one thing that more readers have written me about, it is about George and their love of George, and the fact that George wound up illuminating Morgan, who's Hester's partner, very well in that second novel, in the missing ones. And I brought George is back, if anyone is worried. George is back in this book, and now he lives with Angela, and he serves a function in illuminating Angela in this book too. He also has dogs can only have so big of a role, but he has a very small role, but he helps illuminate Angela, especially at the very end of the book. But Waffles is here. There are 2 new dogs called Fred and Adele, who are based on my friend's dogs, Oscar and Felix. There's another. Then there are a couple of others.
I mean, and it's a dog's name is critical too, because that's so, it reveals who named the dog and where they came from with the dog. I mean, it's really, really fun to read. And naming brings up something. In the Q&A, Jim Ziskin, hello Jim, is asking, Edwin, can you talk about your character names? So this moves right into that. I sense there are more homages than the one to Angie Dickinson, maybe Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon. They seem very clever to me. So
I'm not as clever as you're giving me credit for. So Hester Thursby is, I will say that Hester Thursby, I love the name Hester Thursby, and it's definitely a name people remember, which I think is really helpful. But Hester Thursby, I name characters super, super quickly. Tomorrow when I come up with a new character, I may just name that character James, just because James asked this question. But then I often will go back and change the name later on as I sort of think through what I really want for the character's name. So for Hester, I mean, this is so pretentious, but when I came up with Hester, I knew she was a woman and I knew she had a child. So I named her Hester and I named the child Pearl. And it was, after the Scarlet Letter. And the next day, I was like, this cannot stay. So I quickly changed Kate's name to, Pearl's name to Kate, but I kept Hester. I liked Hester. And then again, the first book was supposed to be funnier than it wound up being. And so for a while, the book was going to be called His Girl Thursby. And that's where I came up with it.
But you can't tell, I mean, I know that I asked you about this instantly. And the same question that Jim has is like, how can Hester Thursby not be from Floyd Thursby in the Maltese Falcon? How can that be? It's just got to be.
I know. I should probably just start lying and say that it is, but no. She came from a old Cary Grant movie.
From an old Cary Grant movie. What one? Do you remember?
His Girl Friday. Oh, so okay. His Girl Thursby. His Girl Friday. Yep.
So you made Friday into Thursby.
Exactly.
Okay. That's whatever you said from an old Cary Grant movie. I'm always thinking about that paragraph. Who was it? Some reporter telegraphed to someone. Walter Winchell telegraphed to Cary Grant. How old Cary Grant? And someone said, and Cary Grant wrote back, "Old Cary Grant, fine. How you?" I mean, I just completely blew that story. But whoever knows the story will know that it's pretty funny. James is going to say, yeah, great movie. Oh yeah, His Girl Friday, that was critical to my career. Obviously. Oh yeah. So we were talking earlier about how Watch Her, I will hold it up yet another time. Watch Her is also about children, about people's relationships with children. Mm-hmm. How is that to write? It's a very tender thing and a very touchy subject to deal with.
Oh, sure. I mean, the book, one of the for me, themes come at the very end of the writing process. And one of the themes that came out of this was it was about mothers and daughters. I mean, there are a series of mothers and daughters in this story, and they have all different types of relationships. And one of the reasons I think that theme was so prominent in this book is because Hester's character journey has been about coming to terms with being in a motherly role. So for anyone who hasn't read the book, Hester has a niece who she's responsible for. In the first book, she's not thrilled to have this kid around. And over the series, she sort of softened her stance toward being responsible for someone else's child. And in this book, I think that she has come to terms with this change in her life. And so I really wanted to bring in this idea of mothers and daughters throughout the whole thing. And both mothers and daughters, like biological mothers and daughters, but also the mother and daughter relationship between people who may not actually be related to each other. So,
and again, the layer of characterization of mother-daughter relationships. I always find that very, it brings tears to my eyes to write mothers and daughters. I do it all the time as well. Does it to you too? It's just one of the most sweet and complicated bonds.
It is, and I enjoyed writing Hester and Kate's relation. Kate actually doesn't have that big of a part in this book, but I enjoyed softening that relationship in this one. My first two books are really pretty dark, and one of the things that I wanted to bring to this book was a softness, and to just show that maturity that she had brought over the years of being responsible for this child. And absolutely, those scenes were really sweet. I liked coming up with because Kate doesn't have a big role. I liked coming up with the little places where Hester could show that tenderness. Like in this book, they're just little throwaway lines, but in this book, every time Hester comes home from being out finding murderers, she always first goes upstairs to make sure that Kate's asleep or make sure that Kate's okay, and then she comes down and she tells Morgan what's happened. And it was just finding little places to do that just made this special. There's Barrett has a relationship with his mother, which largely plays off the page. But again, I wanted to make that into a very tender relationship, and it really comes to a head in the very, very last chapter. And there's been a little shorthand throughout the novel, but again, I wanted to make that into a tender moment.
And it works so beautifully. And I think one of the things that readers love when you close the cover for the last time of the book is a feeling of sort of this completeness and poignancy at the end of a book, that it's not just the solving the mystery, but it's a personal story for someone. And you do that so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
In Watch Her. It's just, Watch Her is such a command. It's something that somebody is supposed to do. It's about obligation. And whether obligation is fulfilled. We're running out of time like crazy, but we're getting a couple of questions about, and I wonder if this comes from your initial idea and Little Comfort to make it be funny, and then it didn't turn out to be funny, but you had chosen a quirky physical appearance for Hester.
Yeah.
And one is Gilmore Tammy is asking, what have the ups and downs of that been, of that choice?
Well, when you write a series, you make decisions, and they stay with you. So when I did write Little Comfort, I decided to make Hester. I wanted Hester to stand out in a crowd. I wanted her to be very bad at surveillance. So I just I went through this what if exercise. I thought, what if she's very tall? What if she has purple hair? And finally, I decided to make her very short. So she's only 4'9" 3/4 inches tall. Which is interesting. It still makes her bad at surveillance. But I actually love that, because one of the things I love about Hester is that she fights to be taken seriously. And physically, like giving her this physical quality where people maybe will decide not to take her seriously. She never puts up with that. And I think that really helps fuel her as a character.
That's great. So I remember back at Malice, the fabulous Margaret Maron used to ask all debut authors, is there anything in your book that looking back now you would have done differently? And I think it's interesting that you would not have changed how she looks.
No.
That's great. That's great. Well, Edwin, we're out of time. S.T. Perkins is saying, all barely 5 feet of me feels you, Hester. So you have done this in a pandemic. You have, over more than 100 people here cheering you on. The world outside is insane and chaotic. And yet we have this wonderful book and you that are bringing us all together this evening. So thank you so much. You're fantastic. I love this book. And
thank
you so much for this. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And can we give a round of applause for Hank too? Oh. Thank you, Hank. Hank is, for anyone who doesn't know, Hank's books are amazing. And I just really appreciate that you took the time out to talk with me tonight.
Oh my goodness, I'm so honored.
Thank you.
And thank you both so much for joining us tonight. It was really a pleasure to have you. And thank you everybody at home who attended. We really appreciate you coming out today. You might have already ordered the books when you got your ticket. If you didn't, you can follow the links that I put in the chat or just go to brooklinebooksmith.com. Edwin Hill's book is now for sale, or if you feel like finally getting out of the house, Brookline Booksmith is now open again. And so you can come into the store and we'll have Edwin's book there as well as a bunch of Hank's. So please, we hope to see you soon. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Hank.
Thank you, Adam. And
Good night,
thank you,
everyone.
Brookline Booksmith. This was great.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.